Hello and welcome to this session on ACTA, that multilateral mechanism created in May to help ensure that goal is made reality of bringing vaccines to the world in a way that is both equitable and global. It is, of course, the Access to COVID Tools Acceleration. That is what it is an acronym for, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this session with panelists who've joined us, an illustrious panel joining us, of course, from around the world, and we're delighted to have you all with us. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, of course, the Director General of the World Health Organization. Hello to you and thank you for being with us. We're joined also, and we're delighted, by Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, as well as by Melinda Gates, of course, the co-chair and trustee of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thanks very much indeed for being with us. Joining us also, Erna Solberg, who is the Norwegian Prime Minister and, of course, has a crucial role within ACTA as the co-chair of the Facilitation Council. So in just a moment, we're going to hear from all of you, and thanks again for being with us. First of all, though, I'd like us to listen to the French President, our host, of course, for the Paris Peace Forum.
Monsieur le Directeur Général de l'Organisation mondiale de la santé, Madame la Présidente de la Commission européenne, Madame la Première ministre Norvège, chère Melinda Gates, chers amis. La pandémie de la Covid-19 a déjà causé la mort de plus d'1 million de personnes et a gravement affecté nos vies comme nos économies. C'est un immense bouleversement qui, partout, exacerbe les inégalités, un bouleversement qui porte aussi de nombreux et nouveaux déséquilibres, si nous n'agissons pas collectivement. Les soignants, dans tous nos pays, sont une fois de plus en première ligne. Leur dévouement est remarquable et je tiens une fois encore à leur exprimer ma plus grande gratitude. Chaque gouvernement est responsable de prendre toutes les mesures possibles pour protéger sa population, arrêter la circulation du virus dans son pays, en vue évidemment d'éradiquer définitivement celui-ci. Mais face à ce défi planétaire, nous avons aussi une responsabilité commune de coopération et de solidarité internationale. C'est la meilleure stratégie contre ce virus qui ne connaît pas de frontières, l'arme de notre efficacité collective. C'est fort de ces convictions qu'il y a un peu plus de 6 mois, alors que nous faisions face à la première vague de la pandémie, nous avons décidé d'unir nos forces. Nous savions que seule une réponse concertée et forte de l'ensemble de la communauté internationale serait à la hauteur de ce défi. Ensemble, nous avons mis en place le dispositif ACTA, avec l'ambition de s'inscrire dans une approche de bien public mondial, c'est-à-dire de permettre un accès pour tous à ces outils de lutte contre cette pandémie. Les résultats obtenus depuis sont impressionnants. De premiers tests rapides, de premiers traitements sont désormais disponibles dans tous les pays, riches ou pauvres. Je pense aussi à la facilité COVAX, qui doit permettre de fournir 2 milliards de doses de vaccins, dont la moitié aux pays en développement. La lutte ne fait cependant que commencer, et nous devons nous mobiliser encore davantage. D'où l'importance de la réunion d'aujourd'hui. Mobilisation financière d'abord, en réunissant les sommes indispensables pour relever ce défi. En complément de nos efforts bilatéraux, de notre soutien à United pour le pilier traitement, j'ai le plaisir de confirmer aujourd'hui que la France contribuera à hauteur de 100 millions d'euros à COVAX dès qu'un vaccin sera disponible. C'est essentiel pour que les pays en développement puissent également bénéficier rapidement de vaccins. La France s'est aussi engagée à apporter 50 millions d'euros additionnels à l'OMS, seule organisation universelle dans le domaine de la santé. Son rôle est essentiel pour renforcer les capacités des systèmes de santé. Et c'est évidemment là une condition indispensable au bon déploiement des produits de santé contre la Covid-19. Mais les ressources publiques ne suffiront pas. Nous devons mobiliser de nouvelles sources de financement et en appeler à la solidarité de chacun. Le secteur privé et les plus riches de cette planète ont à cet égard une opportunité historique pour répondre à cet appel et contribuer à la réponse globale à la crise. Le deuxième point, c'est que nous devons aussi chercher une nouvelle voie avec des financements innovants. La France a joué un rôle précurseur dans ce domaine dès le début des années 2000 et nous devons relancer tous ensemble la réflexion internationale sur ce sujet afin de mettre en place les outils financiers qui lèveront les milliards d'euros encore manquants. Mais l'argent ne réglera pas tous les défis posés par cette pandémie. Il nous faut également nous engager politiquement pour une solidarité exemplaire en matière de partage des solutions à l'échelle de la planète. Nous ne pouvons pas répéter l'erreur de la lutte contre le sida où pendant trop longtemps les molécules étaient au nord et les patients au sud. Une fois développés, les produits de santé doivent être disponibles rapidement pour tous ceux qui en ont besoin partout sur la planète. Et je le répète, Ça n'est pas simplement une exigence de justice, de moralité, c'est aussi, et même d'abord, une affaire d'efficacité collective. Car tant qu'une partie de l'humanité, aussi infime soit-elle, ne sera pas sortie d'affaire, c'est toute la planète qui restera menacée. Nous souhaitons donc que chacun s'engage à suivre des principes communs de transparence, d'équité. Il nous faut nous assurer que les conditions réglementaires et politiques sont toutes réunies pour un accès le plus large et rapide possible à ces produits, tout en respectant les standards internationaux de qualité. C'est pourquoi la France propose que puisse être rapidement adoptée une charte d'ACTA qui réaffirme ces grands principes, partager la connaissance, soutenir les systèmes de santé, avoir des produits rapidement accessibles et abordables, conditionner les fonds publics destinés à la recherche et coordonner l'allocation de ces produits. Un projet a été présenté par la France et nous invitons chacun à se mobiliser sur cette question des principes qui doivent régir notre action commune pour lutter contre la pandémie. Les laboratoires ont évidemment également la responsabilité de contribuer à l'accès équitable. Certains en prennent la voie et je m'en réjouis. Davantage de partenariats et de production doivent être engagés pour produire dans et pour les pays en développement. Enfin, je souhaite que la France, avec ses partenaires européens, puisse contribuer directement aux efforts multilatéraux en donnant une partie de nos doses de vaccins pour la vaccination des personnels soignants des pays les plus pauvres. Une contribution complémentaire en nature viendrait renforcer notre soutien financier et politique à ACTA et permettrait de livrer dans le même délai à celles et ceux qui en ont le plus besoin dans les pays les plus fragiles les premières doses de vaccins lorsque celles-ci seront disponibles. Plus que jamais, nous devons rester solidaires et pour vaincre la Covid-19, rendre aussi le monde post-Covid plus juste, plus équilibré, plus soutenable. Je vous remercie.
Emmanuel Macron there with his message about the necessity, the need for ACTA and what is at its heart. Dr. Tedros, I'd like to begin with you and by putting to you perhaps something the French president just said about that need, not simply to address this question of a universal and equitable access to vaccines in the name of morality, but actually of efficiency. You're the man who's been at the helm of these efforts so far to coordinate a global response. Tell us what you think is at stake.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, when the history of the COVID pandemic is written, I believe that the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator will be recorded as one of its standout successes. Since the earliest days of the pandemic, WHO has supported countries with evidence-based tools to stop transmission and save lives. But we also realized that we need new tools to truly bring the pandemic under control, and that those tools must be acceptable to all countries equitably, accessible to all countries equitably. That's why WHO and partners launched the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, a unique mechanism with two aims: to develop vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics fast, and to allocate them fairly. We thank France, Germany, South Africa, Norway, the European Commission at the center, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for their leadership in creating the political platform for the ACT Accelerator to succeed. And we welcome the development of the ACT Accelerator Charter, which outlines the core principles of equity and fair allocation underlying this landmark effort. The world has come together as never before to ensure vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics are developed, produced, and allocated fairly as global public goods, not private commodities. This is a powerful statement of international solidarity. In the same way, WHO was also proud to join Costa Rica in May to launch the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, CTAP. We also welcome India and South Africa's submission to the World Trade Organization to waive certain provisions of the TRIPS agreement during the pandemic. As global public goods, COVID-19 vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics must be available on the basis of equitable and affordable access for all, especially for health workers, the elderly, and other at-risk groups. This is not just a moral imperative, as you said, and a public health imperative. It's also an economic imperative. It's in the interest of each and every state on earth. In our interconnected world, if people in low and middle income countries miss out on vaccines, the virus will continue to spread and the economic recovery globally will be delayed. Equitable access is in the national interest of each and every country. Vaccine nationalism will prolong the pandemic, not shorten it. Making vaccines work requires a broad collaboration, not just across sectors, but across partners. No country can address these challenges alone. Efforts like the ACT Accelerator and CTAP show that when countries and partners work together and engage through multilateral platforms, they're stronger. The vaccines pillar of the ACT Accelerator, COVAX, is a perfect example, bringing together Gavi, CEPI, the Global Fund, and WHO to support the development of the world's largest portfolio of vaccine candidates. Already, 186 countries and economies will benefit from the COVAX facility, including 92 lower-income countries and economies who are eligible for assistance through the advanced market commitments. Some countries are buying more vaccines in advance in quantities more than double their population size, putting at risk the access and affordability of vaccines for other countries. To fully realize the potential of the ACT Accelerator, it must be fully funded. The financing gap for the ACT Accelerator currently stands at $28.5 billion, with $4.5 billion needed urgently to maintain momentum. Fully financing the ACT Accelerator will help to control the pandemic, restore confidence, and stimulate the global recovery. This is a moment for saying no to nationalism and vaccine nationalism, and yes to our shared humanity. I thank you.
Dr. Tedros, thank you very much for those thoughts. I'd like to turn now to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. We're also very honoured that you should be with us today. I think you've had probably more direct experience than most of the difficulties inherent in trying to coordinate responses, since your first task was to try to get European countries on the same page when it came to things like vaccine procurement. How difficult was it?
Well, this whole endeavor started when the United States announced this, you might remember it, Operation Warp Speed. And all of a sudden there was a rush to get, as a country or as a nation, at first access to potential vaccines. And it was very difficult at the beginning, but then we convinced member states that it's way better if we act together as 27 in the European Union. We have a better negotiation position towards the pharmaceutical industry. We're way better leverage. The pre-financing is easier. And it was the logic, which also is a global logic, that no one is safe until everybody is safe. You know that sentence. But this also means if we have a vaccine, we should have a common approach to give a fair share to everyone, so that the most vulnerable groups, the frontline workers and the healthcare workers, for example, are the ones who get the vaccine first. And this worked well. So by now, we have contracted with pharmaceutical companies so-called advanced purchase agreements. And what is hidden behind it? The Commission closes a contract with the pharmaceutical industry to have options on vaccine doses if this company finds the vaccine or has developed the vaccine. But what we're doing is investing now in these companies so that their production capabilities are increased. Then, if they are successful with the vaccine, the member states have access to buy their fair share of vaccine doses. The good part is as we invest in increasing the production capabilities of the pharmaceutical industry, the production is not only for the European Union, but also for the rest of the world. And this we have to do now, because as the vaccines will be developed, of course, the demand for the vaccines will be high in large numbers, huge numbers, and for that you need the production capabilities. So we did two things: care, of course, for the European citizens, but at the same time also for the rest of the world. That is, for example, low and middle income countries who also need access and therefore the capabilities to really have these doses.
Madam President, you really illustrate there, I think, how important or what strength there is in numbers, you know, in a coordinated response. Tell us why you think that this equitable and global access to vaccines should be such a global priority for everyone.
First of all, it is a very clear point. Too many lives have been lost already. So that's point number one. And we know that there are groups that are more vulnerable than others. The second point is an economic one. We are so interconnected economically that none of us will get back to the former economic prosperity if the rest of the world is not doing better too. So that vaccination and immunization of the global population is increasing. And we had the example already because in Europe, for example, in the first wave, we had a huge impact of the virus in Southern and Western Europe, but the Eastern and Central European member states were not affected that much. But the economic impact that they had was as strong as in the other member states, even if the virus spread was not that heavy, because, of course, the value chains were interrupted, the flow of goods didn't function anymore, the export or import of goods was not possible anymore. So in a nutshell, this is an example for the whole world. We all know that if there are severe lockdowns and the spread of the virus is heavy in some parts of the world, the rest of the world, of course, as we have a globalized economy, is affected too. So there are good reasons to work together, and the last and most important reason is solidarity. So only if we work together, only if we join forces, we will be able to overcome this virus.
Madam President, I'm going to come back to you in a moment, if I may, about the prominent role that the Commission's decided to play in ACTA in this effort to get vaccines to the world in an equitable and global fashion. I'd like to turn to Melinda Gates now. Also, your foundation has been very prominent, taken an active role in this. I would love your thoughts on what we've seen so far in this crisis and what you think should lie ahead.
Well, thank you for that question, Melissa. And President Macron, Dr. Tedros, Commissioner van der Leyen, Prime Minister Solberg, it's wonderful to share this virtual stage with you. I would start by saying, 2020 has been a hard year to be an optimist, and now it's even harder. France is entering its second lockdown of the year. The United States is enduring its third wave of the virus, and 1 million people around the globe have died. Now, despite these challenging times, I believe we're in a more hopeful place, though, than we were just 6 months ago. Because back in the spring, it wasn't a given that we'd be able to develop vaccines and drugs to fight the virus. But where it stands today, it's likely we'll have at least one safe, effective vaccine ready to go early next year, and possibly even more than one. Now, it also wasn't a given back in the spring that we'd have a global strategy to beat this virus, or if we did, we couldn't be certain that it would be a good strategy. We also didn't know if the strategy would be rooted in the principles of fair access. Would the goal be protecting everyone from this disease, not just people in wealthy countries, but everyone? Well, that's what we have now in the ACT-A accelerator. An effective strategy and a moral one. And the people on this stage helped create that. The organizations involved in ACT-A have done a phenomenal job. They've stood up the operation to manufacture billions of doses of drugs and vaccines and deliver them all over the world. It's amazing how many people across the health field have chipped in and put this effort before their very own interests. There are scientists who, rather than waiting to publish their findings in journals, have shared data with their colleagues. There are pharmaceutical companies that are cooperating in ways and competitors that we've never seen cooperate before. Companies like, or products like remdesivir, which was invented by Gilead, is now being produced in Pfizer factories, as an example. And vaccine makers like AstraZeneca have committed to forego any profits. They're scaling up manufacturing as much as possible. So let me be clear, this might not have happened without France and without the European Commission. From the very first days of this effort, the leaders here have been voices for good governance, saying that we can't just pour money into efforts without being absolutely certain it's backed by the right principles. And now it is, and we have to make sure it stays that way. But here's something else I think every leader needs to recognize. During this pandemic, it's not enough to put the right values behind our money. We also have to put enough money behind our values. We're talking about the largest public health effort in the history of the world, and it won't be inexpensive. The world needs funding for new, more affordable diagnostics. It needs funding for more effective drugs, and it needs funding to buy and deliver vaccines for low-income countries. And in fact, distributing the vaccines may be the most important thing. President Macron and President von der Leyen, thank you for your generosity today. Both France and the EC are each donating an additional 100 million euros. That money will go towards the Act A accelerator's effort to bring COVID vaccines to all countries. And our foundation is also making a contribution today, too. We're donating another $70 million to fight COVID-19. 50 million of that will be for buying vaccine doses for low-income countries, and another 20 million will be for researching even further and new vaccines altogether. These are big dollar amounts, and they're important, but we still have a long way to go. Wealthy nations have spent the summer pre-purchasing doses of vaccine. This way, their people can be immunized as soon as those vaccines are ready. But what about the low and low middle income nations of the world? Countries ranging from South Sudan to Nicaragua. They're home to nearly half of all human beings. And as things stand now, these countries won't have nearly enough doses. The estimate is that at most, they'll be able to cover about 20% of their people. So 4 out of every 5 people would remain vulnerable to this disease. This would be a tragedy for the entire world, not just low-income countries. Even with an oversupply of vaccine, wealthy nations risk reinfection because not everyone will take the vaccine. We could all become like Australia and New Zealand. Both nations have done a remarkable job fighting this virus. They've gone long stretches with very few cases inside their own borders. But without a vaccine, their economies remain depressed because their trading partners are on lockdown. And occasionally, a new carrier of the virus makes their way across the South Pacific, and new clusters of the disease pop up. Those clusters grow and spread, and then schools and offices have to be shut down again. So here's the bottom line. Whether France has to enter a third lockdown or the United States sees a 4th wave, all depends on whether we are able to help the rest of the world fight this disease. And that will take more funding. For 20 years, Bill and I have been asking presidents, prime ministers, and other policymakers in wealthy countries to give money to help improve the health of people around the world. I've met with nationalist leaders who are skeptical. I've met with humanitarian leaders who are generous. But COVID-19 has made that distinction completely irrelevant. In this pandemic, there's no difference between helping yourself and helping others. The self-interested thing and the selfless thing are one and the same. Thank you so much for having me here with you today.
Thank you, Melinda Gates, for that. That I think assessment really of how much has been achieved in terms of people's awareness, realization, as you say, that blurring of the distinction between self-interest and generosity, simply because we're facing something that we can only face together, and also for that outlining of the important contributions. I think it's essential, and we're going to hear now from Erna Solberg, who is not only the Norwegian Prime Minister, but of course also in charge, or the co-president rather, the facilitation tool of ACTA. I'd love you just picking up on where Melinda Gates just left off to give us an idea of where we are with ACTA and what progress has been made and what remains to be done.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank all of the other ones who've spoken before me of their both enthusiasm, their hard work, and all of what's being done now. I think we have, even though this pandemic is it's devastating to our economies. It's terrible to people. Too many people are dying. Too many people are getting long-term illnesses out of this. We still see an international world that is coming together and trying to work very hard to find common solutions. And I think there's been a great development since I started in February asking for money from other countries for financing vaccines at an early stage, up until where we now are with an infrastructure like ACTA is, that we are in fact trying to really deal with this as the global problem that needs a global solutions based on solidarity between our countries. And I think what Melinda said, of course, values is important, the development, research, but money counts. We need more money, and I think that's where we are. ACTA has done and delivered impressive results in a short time. We are close to effective vaccines. We have promising rapid tests, constantly working effectively in Activate to find new solutions also on the distribution. But the total funding gap is still $28 billion US. And we need 4.5 billion urgently to continue the work to make sure that we are following the steps now, that we are managing the direction. And we have to look beyond aid for financing. We can't just put out all the development aid budgets and use that money. We need to look at the private sector. We need to look at innovative mechanisms. We need to look at other ways to get this money up fast, because we need to accelerate this faster than we are doing these days. Of course, we are using a huge amount of money, all of us who are leading different countries, on balancing our economies, making sure that the economic hit isn't that big, transforming our economies into building better after the pandemic. But it will be a longer time until we really get after the pandemic if we don't now put up money for new solutions. We need money to have equitable distribution, to make sure that we are the immunization is reaching out to everybody. I think it's a human rights issue as much as not only a global public good issue. It is, but it's also a human rights issue. And I think Act A is on the right track, but we need to increase countries and companies and private sector representatives' participation in the work to finance even more. Norway, South Africa, and the European Union and the World Health Organization will reach out to the G20 and ask for their leadership in getting necessary funding for ACTA. If not more money is put up by countries, we will not reach our aims. I think it's a great and big significant what we've heard both from President Macron, from the European Commission, and from the Gates Foundation today. I, in fact, have just taken a break from a cabinet meeting to join this panel, and we are in this meeting discussing our further contributions to ACTA. We have contributed $65 million US already, and but we are planning to increase substantially our commitments to make sure that we are having enough money to continue that speedy, rapid development that we are seeing. So But we also need to see other countries, and we need to see that this should be looked upon as part of your economic recovery, because your economic recovery becomes quicker if the whole world quicker comes out of the pandemic situation. And if you really count the numbers that we are using on stabilizing the economy and financing the future and trying to develop competitiveness and building back better, I think $28 billion is not so much. It's in fact a large number if you look at it from a perspective of aid and health financing, but it is not a large sum of money if you're looking at it in the economic perspective of what we are losing every day in gross national products falling all over the world. When people are losing their jobs, to get out of this situation, we also need to make sure that everybody gets out of the situation, and that's why we need to finance this better.
Mr. Solberg, thank you very much. I'd love to put some of those thoughts, what we've just heard from Erna Solberg, but also from Melinda Gates a moment ago. I'd love to hear, Ursula von der Leyen, what you think about that. The idea that, in a sense, so many of these arguments have been, one, appear intuitive to people, that this is the only way that we can avoid further losses and further deaths and a pandemic that isn't under control. Tell us about the Commission's contribution and why you had decided to play such a prominent role. And again, picking up on the comments that were just made, to put money behind those commitments.
Yes, so the story of ACT Accelerator started indeed in spring, and President Macron and Dr. Tedros talked about it. Friends from the United States actually called me and asked the European Commission to join and to show leadership on convening the different stakeholders. And indeed, it's a convening momentum, a convening power that you need. And if you look at who is in or working for the ACT Accelerator, we have more than 40 countries now. We have the WHO as an important multilateral organization. We have organizations like CEPI in it. But also the foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or the Wellcome Trust, just to name some. And we have fantastic co-chairs. This is, you've just heard and seen Erna Solberg and Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of South Africa. Why do I describe that? It shows you need many. And we were also strongly supported by civil society and NGOs, for example, the Global Citizen. So you need many to really step up, build this new construction and raise money. We had 2 pledging rounds where we raised 16 billion, but Erna Solberg is right, this is not enough. And Melinda Gates also said it, this is not enough. Erna, you said you now need 28 billion more for the ACT Accelerator to fulfill its objectives. I just want to remind us all that 28 billion, well, that's the same sum the transport sector and the global tourism sector lose in just 2 days of lockdown. So there is a very clear message behind it. It's way better to invest now in the ACT Accelerator and in COVAX for the distribution in every corner of the world of vaccines, than to have to struggle longer with all the confinement measures we have suffered of during this pandemic. So I really welcome, and it's really good news, the contributions that have been announced by Melinda Gates and by Erna Solberg. So the Commission also will contribute another 100 million to the COVAX facility. In the COVAX facility, it's so outstanding that you have 186 countries that come together, and we have one pillar for the higher income countries, and the second pillar where the low and middle income countries are. And we expect the high income countries to finance the vaccines and the deployment of vaccines for low and middle income countries. That's what COVAX is for. So it's enormously important also to support COVAX, where Gavi, with an enormous knowledge, is distributing or is ready to deploy the vaccine to every corner, every village of this globe where it is necessary. I think this is a strong case for stepping up together, for really calling for solidarity. It's in our common interest. It's the first time we've done that in such a way together, but it's the very first time that the world has to fight such a global pandemic. And it's worth to show that we will overcome this pandemic with solidarity and joint action.
Madam President, thank you very much. I think really interesting there to look at the cost of inaction when we're trying to look at the cost ahead in terms of action within this particular mechanism that seeks to bring these vaccines globally and equitably. Dr. Tedros, I'd love to ask you, having heard everything you've just heard, how confident you are that this can be done?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, this pandemic is unprecedented. And it has taken the whole world hostage. And the only option we have is cooperation and solidarity, as has been said by all speakers, Ursula, Melinda, and also Erna Solberg. I fully agree. So it's a must. And I think the world is seeing it that way. And I really like what Melinda said. Self-interest and selfless are the same. So for any individual or any country, the sharing is something they do for themselves. It's in their own interest. So that's why I think the world is realizing that and moving in that direction. And also, as I said in my speech, there are some problems we see with some countries, but by and large, there is a consensus which is really coming up strongly, and the world speaking or saying the same thing. But I hope we will keep the momentum going and show true commitment. And that commitment should be seen in action. We have now good news, one vaccine which is already announced and very promising, and we expect more vaccines, and we hope there will be a good production capacity to have a good number of size of vaccines to distribute to the priority groups that we have identified as part of the allocation framework. But to sum up, this is a coalition of multilateral organizations, governments, civil society, the private sector, and I'm really convinced and I'm optimistic that we can implement the accelerator. So thank you so much again to all who have joined today. An excellent group that has been on the front from the start. The reason behind the success of the ACT-A are those who are participating today in this panel, and also others who are working day and night from all the institutions that we have already mentioned. Thank you.
Doctor, thank you so much. We're really grateful to you and to all the panelists. Such an illustrious panel today, and so many important voices that have allowed us really to measure what's been achieved and also what lies ahead. Thank you all for joining us in this session this afternoon. Such a pleasure to see you all in one place on such an important issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to hear now from the Spanish Prime Minister. A number of voices, of course, very important in the search for a way, a mechanism that will bring these vaccines to the world in a way that is at once global and equitable. Here's what Pedro Sanchez had to say.
We launched the ACT accelerator just 6 months ago. and it has already made great achievements since then. We should feel proud about it, but there's yet much to do to ensure the ACT's effectiveness. We're still in the midst of the pandemic, and the fastest way out will be through effective, safe and accessible vaccines, treatments and diagnostics. If we manage to develop effective vaccines against COVID-19, it will be much more than what has been achieved with other diseases. Let's remember that there is still no vaccine for malaria or HIV, and this is actually happening in record time. But the real challenge will still be to make these vaccine treatments and diagnostics available across the globe. For ACTA to meet its objectives, its goals, we need as many countries, as many private actors as possible to join. We should also keep the momentum to close the current financial gap. Spain has supported the ACTA from the start, because we know that we need to work together to end this dreadful pandemic. And we will continue to spearhead these efforts. This is why I'm happy to share that the 50 million euros Spain announced in May for Gavi will be allocated exclusively to the advanced market commitment for COVID-19 vaccines. This mechanism will be critical to ensure the production and distribution of vaccines in low and middle income countries. So I hope today marks another milestone that garners even more support from all around the world.
Pedro Sanchez there on Spain's contribution to ACTA. He has, of course, been on the forefront of one of the fiercest battles in Europe against the pandemic. Another leader who's been on the front line in Europe has, of course, been the Italian Prime Minister.
Since the beginning of this pandemic, Italy has called for a multilateral and multidimensional response based on international cooperation and solidarity, and guided by science, medicine, and innovation. The upcoming second wave of the pandemic demands all governments to take again difficult decisions and requests important sacrifices from our citizens. Yet, national solutions are not enough. We must continue to focus on international partnership for a simple reason. While the virus knows no border, we can fight it efficiently only if we join efforts to limit its circulation and to identify the most effective remedies. The accelerator, the most important multilateral cooperative platform to ensure universal and equitable access to diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines, is the best example of this international effort. And Italy is proud to have been among the very first to contribute to the accelerator, especially focusing on the COVAX facility to the benefit of the most vulnerable countries. Now we must all step up to close the remaining financial gap. Providing global access to health services is a moral, political, social, and economic imperative. It's also clear that fighting the virus is instrumental not only to saving millions of lives, but also to overcoming the heavy socio-economic effects of the pandemic. We should not underestimate their importance, since they can be deeply disruptive of the social fabric of our countries. We welcome the recent news coming from research on vaccines. We are confident that science, medicine, and technology will deliver the health tools we need. It's now our responsibility to ensure that once available, we will be ready through their safe, effective, timely, and equitable distribution all over the world. It's a huge challenge, that requires very accurate planning. The incoming Italian presidency of the G20 will put global health at the top of its agenda and is fully committed to advancing and supporting the fundamental work of the accelerator. Together with the European Commission, Italy will also host a Global Health Summit in 2021, which will focus on our response to the pandemic, on the financial support needed by the accelerator, and on the goal to build resilient national health systems. Humanity needs leadership and solidarity to defeat the coronavirus. Italy stands ready to contribute to this common goal. Together, we can move out of the corona world and turn it into a collective, better destiny for us and for our children. Thank you.
Giuseppe Conte there on why this pandemic and the necessarily global answers to it will be at the heart of the priorities for Italy as it takes over the rotating presidency of the G20. We're going to listen now to the Foreign Affairs Minister of Saudi Arabia, which of course currently holds the presidency of the G20, to have a listen to what he thinks about the efforts so far and what more needs to be done.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset I would like to convey to you the greetings of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz and His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and their best wishes for a successful outcome of this summit. I also would like to express our thanks and appreciation to President Macron and the Republic of France for hosting this important gathering at this important time. And finally, I'd also like to express our appreciation to the Secretary General of the World Health Organization and to the World Health Organization for the tremendous efforts that it has expended in dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic. Saudi Arabia hosted a summit of the G20 earlier this year, chaired by the custodian of the Holy Mosques, King Salman bin Abdulaziz, in order to show our commitment to dealing with this pandemic and our desire to work very closely with our partners around the world to find a solution to it. We are committed to working with our partners around the world, and we will continue to do so. The Kingdom has contributed $500 million to the efforts globally so far, in addition to providing material support to countries that need such support. And we are working with international pharmaceutical companies to seek and develop a vaccine for this pandemic, and we hope that we will be able to succeed soon in order to provide people around the world with the ability to defend themselves against this pandemic. With regards to our domestic policies, the Kingdom has adopted a whole of government approach to dealing with this matter. We have a committee headed by the Minister of Health that includes more than 20 other departments in our government, and they look at everything. They have increased our ability to test. They have increased the number of labs. We have mobile labs. We have drive-through labs that conduct testing to all of our citizens and all of our residents. We have increased the capacity in our hospitals. We have increased the capacity in terms of our ICUs and increased the number of respirators that we have. We were able, thank God, to flatten the curve. In early July, the total number of active cases in Saudi Arabia exceeded 60,000. Today, the number is below 10,000. The number of infections in early July reached over 5,000 cases per day. Today, it's down to between 300 and 400. And what is very optimistic from our perspective is that the number of recoveries are beginning to exceed the number of infections. We will continue to do this. Our schools are virtual. We have restricted foreign travel until January 1 of next year, and we are looking at ways to see how we can open up gradually in a way that doesn't provide harm or jeopardize our citizens or our residents. And we are working with our friends in the international community to see if we can come up with procedures or protocols where we can manage this gradual opening in a way that doesn't contribute to a second or third wave. We are committed, in conclusion, to working with the international community, to working with our G20 partners, to working with the World Health Organization in order to deal with this pandemic, because we believe that what is required is a global effort. And I want to once again thank President Macron and the Republic of France for hosting this important summit. And we look forward to working with you, and we look forward to the day when we overcome this pandemic and life returns to normal and we're able to resume economic activity and trade and travel. Thank you very much.
Saudi Arabia's Foreign Affairs Minister there, wrapping up some of those very important government voices in terms of what needs to be done and how much more there is yet to do. We're going to listen now to a few voices representing those international organizations who are directly involved in ACTA and its implementation. We're going to start with the Executive Director of the World Bank. I asked her a short while ago why equitable and global access to vaccines was so important.
Thank you for your question. Ensuring global equitable access to vaccines and therapeutics for low-income and middle-income countries is a priority, because it is only through this access will these countries be able to alter the course of the pandemic, save lives, rebuild livelihoods, and recover their economies. And without doing that, there will be a loss of decades of development gains, as well as a rise of poverty in these countries. Our experience with the eradication of polio and other infectious diseases tell us that without support, these developing countries can wait for many, many years before they can access vaccines. Therefore, this is why we have launched our vaccine financing program worth $12 billion to ensure that developing countries, low and middle income countries, can access and deploy vaccines. With this program, we hope to be able to vaccinate up to 1 billion people. We are working closely with partners, the UN agencies, CEPI, and Gavi and the ACT accelerator and the COVAX facility, as well as countries themselves, to be able to give support, financing, as well as technical support to access and deploy vaccines, therapeutics, as well as diagnostics on the ground. I just want to emphasize that we are not just helping or providing support to countries for accessing the vaccine, but also to deliver the vaccination program itself. And this is about setting up the infrastructure and the delivery systems on the ground to be able to vaccinate at scale as well as at speed. And in terms of the ACT accelerator and the COVAX facility, the World Bank supports fully this COVAX facility because it is intended to provide global equitable access to vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics to the poorest and most vulnerable countries. And therefore, through our financing, we are giving countries the options to choose the best way they can access vaccines as well as ensure their delivery, including the COVAX facility. And we will be working with COVAX facility, with Gavi, to ensure and enable that countries can be best served to be able to access these vaccines in an equitable way, and hopefully in a timely way, because I think early access is also the other important issue if we are going to be able to alter the course of the pandemic and therefore rebuild lives and livelihoods and economies. Thank you.
The Executive Director there of the World Bank, reminding us of those several pillars, of course, that are at the heart of ACTA. There's, of course, vaccines, there's therapeutics, and there's diagnostics. We're going to hear now from Seth Berkley of Gavi, sort of one of those institutions that is really implicated in the vaccine side of the problem.
Gavi is the co-lead of COVAX, the vaccine pillar of the ACT accelerator, along with CEPI and WHO. Our goal is to accelerate the development of COVID vaccines and ensure that people in all countries get rapid, fair, and equitable access, regardless of their ability to pay. Without COVAX, there is a very real danger that the vast majority of the world will go unprotected, allowing the spread of the virus to continue unabated. This would not only prolong the crisis, the human suffering and economic misery, but also threaten peace and global security, with the risk of sporadic civil unrest and violence increasing each day. COVAX solves this by bringing nations together to work towards a solution that benefits all. With 186 economies now involved, representing 90% of the global population, the initial aim is to make 2 billion doses available by the end of 2021, enough to protect high-risk individuals in countries across the world. But now we need the world to rally and fund the lower-income country support mechanism, the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment, to make this possible, enabling people in the world's poorest countries to get the same access to these vaccines. That's in everyone's self-interest, because no one is safe until everyone is.
Seth Berkley there on Gavi and what it's doing about vaccines. And we're going to turn now a little bit more to the therapeutic side. We're going to listen to Marisol Touraine speaking for Unitaid.
Thank you, Melissa. Unitaid has been working for 15 years to improve access to health for people living in low and middle income countries. For instance, we provide millions of tests for $1 each only. So we have been involved in ACTA since the beginning as co-leader of the treatment pillar. The presence of the world's leaders today gives me great hope, because we need their commitment against COVID-19 and to defeat the diseases that strike the most vulnerable populations all around the world. I want to share with them two messages. First, to defeat COVID-19, yes, we need vaccines, but we also need treatments and diagnostics alongside them. I somehow feel the hope that the vaccine will be the solution is excessive. And I solemnly ask the heads of states and governments to reinforce their support to research for treatments and diagnostics in addition to vaccines. Secondly, I want to recall other diseases that still claim millions of lives every year. In 2020, tuberculosis will kill at least as much people as COVID-19 in silence. I ask world leaders to maintain their commitment to end HIV, AIDS, TB, and malaria, and support multilateral global health organizations to turn the dream of a safer and healthier world into reality. We all count on them. Thank you.
Marisol Touraine bringing us to the end of this look at where ACTA is, how much has been achieved and how much further there is to go. Thank you very much to all of you who followed this discussion.